Well, today we're going to be on the topic, don't expect support when you are ahead of the curve. And when you're ahead of the curve, you will get some support. You will find often people that you had not expected will help you out. You'll find some strategic support coming from people that surprise you. But what you won't find is a general groundswell of people applauding what you're doing. If you get a general groundswell, it will be people deriding you, saying, what you're doing, that has no bearing on what's going on now, because it doesn't. It's for the future, which has not yet arrived. They'll say, what you're doing doesn't make sense today, and it doesn't, because you're getting ready for something that's coming on the horizon that isn't seen yet. So what you're working on is of strategic importance to finish, but people around you won't be able to see it. And so when you're ahead of the curve, you will get, in many cases, people talking about how what you're doing is not of value. And it's very strategic and important and helpful in those moments to press in on what God has put on your heart, the things that you believe are right to do, and to keep doing those. So one example, Noah and his family. Noah had a wife, 3 sons, and their wives. And Noah heard from God. God said, I want you to build a boat. From that wall to that wall, through the fellowship hall, through past the office, down to the street, across the street, to the end of the parking lot. We're going to have to buy the neighbor's house down at the end of the parking lot and knock it down because there's not enough room from that wall to the end of the parking lot for this boat. It's going to be 3 stories tall. And when Noah started building this boat, my guess, just guess, is that some neighbors came by and said, this is so awesome. You're building a hotel that looks like a boat. What a great marketing idea. This is going to attract so many people. It's brilliant. And Noah said, well, actually, this great big spacious area, this is for the elephants. And on the other side over there, that's for the rhinos because we need to balance the weight. And the hippos are going to be in the back. And the giraffes, they're going to see this tall spot, that's for them. And the person is laughing for a while and then eventually realizes, you're serious in your derangement. You actually believe that instead of human guests, you're going to have all the beasts of the world inside your boat. And the reason it's so gigantically enormous big is because you want to keep the crocodiles away from some of the things the crocodiles might eat. And 3 floors. So at some point, the people are going to move from admiration to the brilliant marketing of creating a hotel that looks like a boat to saying, you do realize you're building this on dry land, not next to a lake, not next to a river. And that kind of helpful feedback from friends, you do realize you're out of your mind, don't you? That kind of helpful feedback from friends lasted the length of the project. At some point, maybe they got all the way done, from here all the way to the end of the parking lot, completely built, and the people said, wow, can't believe you wasted all those years doing that, but at least you're done. Noah says, no, that's just the first deck. We're building 3 decks. So this went on for decades. You may be involved in a project like Noah that nobody else can see the value of, and you are certain in your good days, not every day, some days you think, I'm a lunatic just like they said. But in your good days, you're believing, I know that there is a cure for cancer in this thing, and I am going to get it. In your good days, you're believing that what I am working on, even though other people cannot see the value of this, I know that there is value in this. There is gold where I'm digging, and I'm going to dig till I find it. Abraham and Sarah had a similar mission to Noah's in that the community couldn't see the value of it. Abraham and Sarah were told, you're going to leave where you are, the place that you know, and you're going to go to a foreign country because I'm going to give that foreign country to your ancestors in 450 years. God works on projects that are way outside our lifetime and gets us to work on things that we will not see the end of because it's a strategic moment now to put in place now what is coming in the future. Abraham and Sarah were required 450 years before Israel got into the Promised Land to do the advance work. And they could have said, you know, that's a long ways off, we're never going to see it. But they didn't say that. They said, we're going to do something that will benefit people we will never meet until heaven. Hebrews 11 says this, by faith Abraham obeyed. He set out not knowing where he was going. He'd never been to the country before. By faith he stayed in a tent as in a foreign land. He and Sarah were living in tents as if they had, well, they didn't have any standing in the land. They were just nomads. But they were believing every place they looked around in that land, they said, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. I don't own it yet, but that city's mine. That countryside is mine. That vineyard's mine. By faith. He was just living in a tent. By faith he stayed as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac. Abraham and Sarah lived that way. Their son lived that way, as did their grandson. And 450 years, many people only had the promise. He looked forward to a city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So as he was looking around the Promised Land, he could see that city, that's going to be mine. But maybe not as it's currently constructed, because God is a good architect and God might have better plans than the architects of those buildings. The building that Abraham was looking forward to had a solid foundation, but it was going to be designed by God. All of these people, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, and a number of people, other people mentioned in Hebrews, they all died in faith without having received the promises. They heard the promise of God, they aligned their life to it, but they died without having received it. But they saw from a distance and greeted the promise from a distance. There's a popular story about Walt Disney who died before one of the parts of his parks could be completed, and as it was completed, some people commented, well, it's too bad Walt couldn't have seen this. And the reply was, the reason it's built is because Walt saw it. He saw the whole thing. And the reason that you can go there today is because Walt saw it before he died and pulled it into the present. From a distance, they saw and greeted the promises of God. So when you're working ahead of the curve, you're going to be working on things that other people can't see. Abraham and Sarah, 450 years. Who has vision for that long? Other people won't be able to see it. You can see it. So don't let other people discourage you. John 8. Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. Abraham was hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus. Jesus tells the people around him, Abraham, looking forward to the future, didn't stop at 450 years when Israel would be entering into the Promised Land. Abraham looked forward to the day of Jesus and rejoiced. He saw what God was doing in the future and was delighted to be a part of that great trajectory. Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day, Jesus said. And the reply was, Jesus, you're not yet 50 years old. And have you seen Abraham? Abraham died centuries ago. And you're only 30-some. Why are you talking about seeing Abraham? And Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. Jesus claimed that he existed at the beginning of time, But before creation, Jesus, Paul says, was there, and all of creation was created by him, through him, and for him. That Jesus was an intimate part of all of life. Abraham and Sarah, in all the lives of all the saints, up to today. If you're not feeling very saintly, would you paint a halo around your head? Next time you look in the mirror, paint a halo there. Maybe I can visit your house and see a picture of you on the refrigerator with a halo on it someday. That's how God sees you. God knows what you've done, but you are clothed with Christ, covering up what you have done. Very truly, I tell you, Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is a friend of Abraham, Sarah, just like Jesus is a friend of yours. Well, in this working ahead of the curve, we're going to look at one story from 1 Kings 18 today. We looked a couple weeks ago at how Ahab was a bad king, the Bible says, and Elijah told him there would be no rain for 3 years because God wanted to send a sign both to Ahab and to the nation that what they were doing was out of line. They needed to change. They needed to do something different. And often when people hear the correction of God, they choose, in some cases, like Nineveh, to make a huge course correction and to get in alignment with God's purposes. And it's to their salvation and glory and to the favor of their children for generations. And other times, people ignore it or fight against it. Ahab was told there'd be no rain for 3 years, and at the end of those 3 years is where we're picking up the story. At the end of the 3 years, Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, because there's a sound of rushing rain." Everywhere you look, it was the kind of parched earth you would find after no rain for 3 years. There's a spot where the ground dries out, and a spot after that where it cracks, and a spot after that where the dust is so dry, if you put water on it, it won't get absorbed. It's too dry to take water. In the midst of a landscape of cracked, dry earth, Elijah tells Ahab, "I can hear the rain. You can't hear anything? I can hear the rain. Go up, celebrate, eat, and drink, because the rain's coming." And then Ahab took him at his word, went up to eat and drink, and Elijah himself, the text says, bowed down upon the earth and put his face between his knees. Having prophesied the future, having told the king what the future would be, Elijah now is interceding, calling out to God, praying it into existence. I do not know if this is required or not. I just know that Elijah was not intent to stop until he'd done everything he could to bring about the future that God had proposed, that God had said was coming. So Elijah is crying out to God, prostrate on the ground, and tells his servant, he's following this acronym PUSH, which some of you know. Pray until something happens. Just push. Pray until something happens. If you've got a stuck spot in your life, push. Pray until something happens. So Elijah was in that posture, and he sends his servant. He says to his servant, "Go up now and look toward the sea." So I imagine the servant had to go up to some mountain where he could see over to see the sea. Servant goes up, comes back, says, "There's nothing. It's blue sky everywhere you look." Elijah says, "Go look a second time." And he stays in this push posture, pray until something happens. He continues to intercede, continues to call out to God, asking God to bring about what God has promised. God, you've said the rain's coming. You've said that it's coming now. Thank you for the rain. Go look. Go look a second time. The guy wanders all the way up, looks out, looks at the sea, comes back. There's nothing. Elijah says, Go look a third time. Now at this point, I'm guessing that the servant probably didn't rush. He's seen how this is going to play out. Elijah only wants one kind of news. If he doesn't come back with a different kind of news, he's going to have to go again. So he may as well not rush. Probably goes into town, plays a little pool, a little ping pong. If you aren't signed up for a tournament yet, it's coming up. Mark Armstrong, this is way off the subject, but Mark Armstrong got bragging rights for a year that he was the ping pong champion. And there are some people who said, well, I just wasn't there. Well, you lost for a whole year. Mark was the champion this year. Somebody else might be champion. Where was I? Go look a third time. So there's no reason for him to hurry. Gets to the top of the mountain, throws rocks until he causes an avalanche, watches the avalanche, wonders if he can cause a bigger one. There's nothing over the sea. Eventually he gets bored, wanders back. There's nothing. Okay, go look a fourth time. Now, part of what might be happening is if you're working on something where you're ahead of the curve and nobody else can see it, some of the time you have enough faith to overwhelm the objections of others. And sometimes when somebody keeps telling you there's nothing, why are you still doing this, you just can't be around them anymore because you don't have enough faith to overcome their doubt or the statement of where the land actually is, because you're seeing it, you're calling it into the future. When Tony Robbins was at the start of his career, he knew where he was headed, and when people would interview him, talk about what he was doing, he'd talk about houses he had, things he was working on, and his staff would get kind of bug-eyed. None of that's true, Tony. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I mean, he was living in the future in his mind's eye. And it took a really quite short time before he pulled it into the present. You can be working on things so much so that you can see it where nobody else can. Go look a fourth time. So he went off. Don't know how long he stayed away. Eventually came back. You know, boss, there's nothing, but I bet I know what you're going to say. Yeah, go look a fifth time. Went off. Don't know how long he stayed away. Eventually came back. You know, you could give up. You could tell Ahab, sorry, but it looks like it's still going to be dry for a while. Now go look a sixth time. Meanwhile, Elijah continues to pray. I cannot tell you if the prayer is an essential part or if it's just part of God's timing, whether Elijah prayed or not. Something would have happened. I can only tell you the story as is. Go look a sixth time, came back, there's nothing. All right, go look a seventh time. He came back and said, there's next to nothing. Elijah said, all right, go look an eighth time. Wait a minute. What did you say? He said, there's next to nothing. Over the whole landscape, you can see there's blue sky everywhere you can see, except for down by the sea. There's one little spot that is about as big as a person's hand, but it's way in the distance and it's very tiny, and you shouldn't get excited. Elijah says, run. Now's the time. That little dot that you see, that is change. That is God's change coming. You run to the king and tell him that he needs to run. Harness his chariot and get back home before the rain stops him. And the servant, who's been going back and forth up the mountain and back to look out to the sea 7 times in a row, seeing nothing and finally next to nothing, is probably thinking, I wonder if there's anybody else I could apprentice to. But Elijah was right. A lot of times, when you see that little time, the whole landscape is unchanged, and there's just one little tiny sign of change, that's the time to be celebrating and rejoicing that God is doing something. In a little while, the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy rain, so heavy that it was hard for everybody to get home, hard for the chariots to ride through the mud and the muck. When you're ahead of the curve, you will see things that other people can't see. When you're ahead of the curve, you will believe things that others can't believe. When you're ahead of the curve, you will do things that others won't do. Because you're the one that God has given the vision to. And some of you are saying or thinking, well, thank goodness God hasn't told me to build an ark, or to tell the king there won't be rain for 3 years, or there will be after a 3-year drought. So it may be that you don't know what it is that God has commissioned you to do that's far into the future. For most people, God's kingdom is ahead of the curve, and I have, if you don't know what God's purpose is for you, I have 3 simple steps that will help you in the meantime. So if you don't have an ark that you're building right now, if you're not on a project to cure cancer or to do something strategic that is life-changing and far beyond your ability, if you're not working on that big thing yet that God has put in your heart to do, here's 3 easy steps of what to do in the meantime. Pick any gospel. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all write about Jesus from slightly different perspectives. Pick any one of the 4, it doesn't matter which one. Pick one of the 4, read a chapter a day. It will take you about 5 minutes. You can do it in 5 minutes. Just read a chapter a day, and then do whatever Jesus tells his followers to do. You're a follower of Jesus, so when Jesus tells his followers to go and do something, or to believe something, or to say something, you go do, believe, and say that. I can tell from all the coughing, this is getting some resistance. This will change your life. It will change the lives of people 450 years from now. Pick a gospel, read a chapter a day, do what Jesus tells his followers to do. So 2 examples, and we're done. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I've told you. If you don't know what God's called you to do, just do what Jesus tells you to do in the meantime. There's plenty to do right there. You do not need to become a pastor or a missionary to do this. You can be a dentist, you can be a professor, you can be a CFO or a CTO or a CEO or a C whatever, XO, whatever gets invented next year. You can be in any position and do this. Plumber, nursery care worker, gardener. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them to obey. Different spot in Matthew. Sorry, 2 examples are from Matthew, but you can pick any example. Proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Jesus says, you know, today it looks like the world is awful messed up, but God's kingdom is near to you today. That's something you can count on and believe in. And when you're saying that to people, give them evidence of it. Show them what it's like. And so when you're saying that to people, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Very easy. Jesus gives you the authority to do it. Sometimes it's remarkably easy, and it's in context that you may not even imagine. In my neighborhood, there was a dog that was barking for 3 hours, 2 hours, before I woke up and finally thought, maybe something's bothering that dog. I said silently, I'm a lot of yards away, so the dog isn't going to hear me if I talk out loud anyway. Spirit bothering that dog, be gone in Jesus' name. Instantly the dog became silent. There's a spirit bugging that dog, and for 2 hours I didn't do anything about it because I was busy on something and I didn't notice. Just notice. What is it in the environment around you that's upset? Go help. Your help can be something as simple as a prayer. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. If you just start on that, you don't have to read any more of the Bible. That's enough for a lifetime. Helps to read more of the Bible. But that's enough. If you don't have your art project yet, here's one. We're going to take a moment for prayer. God, thank you for your amazing mercy for us. Thank you that you call us to things that are so far in the distant, it's way beyond our lifetime. So that Abraham and Sarah Moses, Noah, all the people that you've worked with, Jesus, all the people that you've worked with have been given assignments that do not end with their lifetime, but at the end of their days, they just see the beginning of what's possible. And after they are gone, you continue to work on bringing into the present the future that they saw before they could see it in reality. Thank you for days when people are telling their helpers, go take a look, tell me what you see, and in spite of the fact that their helpers keep saying, you know, nothing has changed, that you are doing something mighty in us, through us, with us, even for us, so that Jesus can be glorified. We thank you and we praise you. Amen.